Hi everyone, and welcome to the 12th Canadian Science Policy Conference, CSPC 2020. My name is Ayah, and as part of our CSPC interview series, we have with us here today Heidi Klein, who is the Human and Community Wellbeing Lead at Two Worlds Consulting. Hi Heidi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Ayah?
I'm good. Okay, we'll get started with some questions. As a starting point, could you give us some background on what your role is at Two Worlds Consulting and in general what kind of consulting work you do?
Well, I'm actually going to first say I'm talking to you from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, which included the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Westconnecht nations out here in Victoria, BC. It's just something we do at Two Worlds Consulting is acknowledge the territories in which we're working. My role is as the Human and Community Wellbeing Lead at Two Worlds Consulting, which means I lead a team of the sort of the socioeconomic impact assessment practitioners. I'm also actively involved in the sort of traditional knowledge or traditional ecological knowledge or Indigenous knowledge work that gets undertaken from an impact assessment perspective, and especially the weaving of the knowledge together with Western science, because I have a background in sort of both fields, anthropology and biology. And I'm also actively involved in sort of policy development, legislation development. I'm often asked to advise different groups on policy and legislation development. So that's sort of the broad spectrum of my role here.
So you spoke a little bit about how your work really tries to weave together Indigenous knowledge and some of this Western science. How can some of this work be leveraged to inform policymaking and to benefit Indigenous communities?
Wow, that's that's a challenging question. But in my 25, 30 years of experience, I find that having all the knowledge types involved in decision making leads to a better project and better mitigation measures. So, for example, what I've learned from Indigenous people is that their Indigenous knowledge of the land it goes back centuries, and as a scientist, I just don't have the benefit of having centuries worth of knowledge in front of me. We might get a year or two of field work done, and then we have to use environmental models to extrapolate what that might mean for the environment. So if we include Indigenous knowledge in our decision making, which is what we do, we interweave those knowledge perspectives, we come up with a much better, I'm going to say, environmental assessment product, a much better project design, because as Western science, we simply can't know everything that's needed out there when you've only got a few years of field work. And so I've found that the best impact assessment work is actually when there's a close collaboration between the knowledge holders and the Western scientists. And so, for example, I did some work a couple of years ago. I was working intimately with with the knowledge holders in the Arctic, where I've done most of my work over the years. And it struck me so strongly how often science is only done in the summertime when the weather is nice, especially in the Arctic, and that the Arctic winters are a complete sort of blank of sort of, well, what goes on in the dark kind of thing. And so by working with the knowledge holders on their understanding of the environment, and especially how the animals interact in the environment and how to behave in the Arctic winters, we gain so much more knowledge in terms of all those other seasons that normally as scientists we wouldn't be involved with, and so the overall benefit is sort of a fuller understanding of the value of Indigenous knowledge, and with that comes all the sort of rules and obligations and how to live in that environment, because the cultures arose in those environments. But at the same time, it really fleshes out the picture of what we can put together in Western science, and we can like literally design a better project, say, change the project footprints, do better mitigation measures, and overall, especially in projects that are in more remote communities, have something that the affected communities are proud to say is a project that they've had a hand in designing, and that there's sort of a much fuller collaboration between the developer and the communities, and it leads to much better relationships. But if that Indigenous voice is ignored and not brought into the decision making about a project, I've found things get completely sidetracked and bogged down as sort of both voices try to make each other heard. And so I think that the overall benefit is better community engagement, better Western better project design, and better mitigation for a project to go ahead. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So I guess that sort of lends us into the next question in terms of what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing our scientific and socioeconomic challenges, and what role does science policy play in overcoming some of these challenges?
Well, we know there are a lot of challenges out there. You know, people speak to climate change or endangered species and habitat loss, or concerns about water quality and air quality. And what I've noticed over the years, because in the past I have worked in different government positions, is that there's actually been a lot, it's almost like a loss of interest in policy development, except every 4 years during an election cycle, when one government says, you know, our platform is better than your platform. And it's almost like you're voting on policy as opposed to sitting down together and let's design policy together, which is the way it was done in the past. Is we took the time to hear from a broad range of voices, a broad range of values and interests, and designed a policy that a broader spectrum of Canadians could, I'm going to say, essentially buy into and agree that this is what we want. This is the future that we want for ourselves. And so I think the challenge with science policy, it's not that we don't have I'm going to say like the Western science knowledge about what is required. The challenge is to bring the values and interests together, because often the science abuts against the social, cultural, or socioeconomic interests that are also out there. So I think it's actually a conversation about reducing the friction between the different points of view. And that's probably where science policy could spend more time, is looking at how to use the knowledge that is out there in Western science, but use it in such a way that it provides a lens of understanding to the broad values and interests that are out there, as we know that there's currently a big concern about economics, and our unemployment rate's up at 12%, and we were at 4%. And so, you know, science gets lost in the shuffle. So there's a friction point right there. So I think I think science policy can actually help with that bridging, but I don't think the way it's being undertaken right now is lending itself for that bridging, because everyone presents their evidence, such as an impact assessment process, and someone else votes on the direction we're supposed to go. And so there isn't actually policy to drive or even support decision makers in what they want to accomplish, or what the future is.
Yes, definitely. So you've been a part of CSPC for a while now, and last year you were part of the CSPC panel that focused on operationalizing precaution and the use of the Precautionary Principle. How has your view on this principle changed since, and how can this be a principle be applied in today's climate?
Well, I actually wasn't on the panel last year. I'll be on the panel this year, but anyway. I have thought about the precautionary principle a lot because it's been part of my work for the last 20, 25 years. And I think in many ways we already operationalize it in the questions we ask, especially in the impact assessment process. We require developers to feature alternatives to the project and evaluate those alternatives. We require mitigation measures that are based in legislation and I'm going to say and otherwise, like community suggestions, advisory committees, especially Indigenous advisory committees in terms of what is suitable mitigation. So I think from an operationalization perspective, if that's actually a word, we already do a lot in terms of trying to meet the obligations of, or it's sort of like the standard techniques of what the precautionary principle provides. But what the precautionary principle can't do is resolve things when there are differing points of view. And that's often when I've seen that there's always a request for more information or more consultation, and that somehow if we have just one more piece of information or a little bit more consultation, an answer will appear that will resolve the clash of values and clash of interests. And so I'm currently thinking is that I think we're doing a good job with the precautionary principle and operationalizing it in our impact assessment processes. But I think some of the other things we do in impact assessment are lagging behind because a lot of the tools and techniques we use go back 50 years when impact assessment was first conceived in 1969, 1970 in the form of legislation and just getting people to think about if you're going to do this project, what's it going to do to the environment? And now we're asking of impact assessment to do so much more. It's not only the environmental change, it's the social change, it's the cultural change, it's and I think we've got lost in the weeds, and I think we need to upgrade our tools and techniques, whether or not it's changing how we look at residual effects. The current practice is that with residual effects, we aim to show how little our project is changing the environment. And that's easily enough to do. We just change where the goalpost is and we say that our baseline is here or the temporal timeline is here. And so maybe we need to rethink, is residual effects the right way of presenting these changes that the project is going to be bringing about? Perhaps we need to look at, do we need to approach things on a valued component system anymore? Because that kind of narrows things down to one or two things. And then again, we're trying to say, well, is this value component more important than this value component? So I think some of the other tools and techniques need to catch up and not necessarily how we are applying the precautionary principle.
Yep. So I guess as a part of CSPC this year, what do you think are some of the benefits of being a part of this community and attending and supporting the CSPC?
Well, I'm going to go back to almost the second question that you asked is there's a huge benefit to knowledge sharing. And I find in the field of impact assessment or some policy development work that I do is I love picking other people's brains and getting their perspectives and learning what they've done, because I'm not I'm a generalist. I'm not a resident expert in anything. And so things like the CSPC, sorry, I'm just tripping over that at the moment, are like a venue where it's you can get quickly caught up and find who the technical experts are. Then you can go to them later on and say, look, I've got this problem. Maybe you can help me resolve this. Can we talk through this together? And so any kind of forum that brings people together where they talk about their research or their approaches to problem solving, I just think benefits everyone. And it's incumbent on people like myself to take advantage of using that sort of collective knowledge that's out there.
And just to finish off, is there anything that you're currently working on or any closing notes you want to share, or anywhere our viewers can go online to learn more about what you and your office are doing?
Yeah, sure. Well, at Two Worlds Consulting, we do have a website, so they can certainly go to the website. It is being upgraded right now. So I'm going to say be patient, but I do want to mention one piece of work we did earlier this year, and it's actually currently on the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada's website. And they had hired us to do a series of case studies looking at the interweaving of Indigenous knowledge with Western science. And so the report was loaded onto their website under their research projects tab, I guess, a week ago. And in that project, we interviewed people across Canada for examples of where they saw this interweaving taking place and where it was done well. And so we talked to people in the Northwest Territories and how the interweaving brought divergent perspectives together. And then we talked to people here in British Columbia, where they use the interweaving to actually allow for Indigenous knowledge to be documented going back to pre-contact, but using all the changes since pre-contact to come up with better mitigation measures and redesigning land use plans so that the Indigenous interests for the area could be part of that land use plan because it was recognized what these lands looked like in pre-contact period. So I encourage everyone to actually seek out that report because some of the case studies that we wrote up there were, it was very interesting in interviewing these people and some of the outcomes that came out of it. And it just confirmed for me that the more collaboration and knowledge sharing that takes place, the better product you have.
So thank you so much for sharing with us today, and thank you for all your insight. And we hope you enjoyed the rest of the CSPC conference.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and you have a good day yourself.
You too. Thank you.